So this is the clavicle. Now there's two ends to the clavicle. The blunt end is the sternal end and the flat end is the acromial end. Now sometimes it's difficult to determine which clavicle we're looking at. So if you remember that the blunt end or the sternal end must be on the medial side and the acromial end is on the lateral side, the shape of the curve curves anteriorly at the acromial end. So this is curving pointing towards the front. Therefore this must be a right clavicle. So this is a scapula. There's a couple of distinguishing features on the scapula which help us determine the scapula's orientation. First of all, we have this sort of lump or process sticking out the top. That's called the acromion. And the acromion is linked to what's called the scapular spine, or the spine of the scapula. Towards the anterior or the front portion of the scapula, we've got this other process sticking out here. It's called the coracoid process. Towards the lateral side of the scapula, we've got this groove here, this sort of spherical type groove. It's called the glenoid cavity, and this forms the socket for the ball and socket joint of our shoulder. So the head of the humerus would be sitting right here in this glenoid cavity. Now if we look at the spine of the scapula must always face to the back, and we know the humerus much attached to the lateral side of our body, then this must be a right scapula. So this is the humerus. Now, there's a couple of distinguishing features on the humerus which help us determine that it is the humerus and also the humerus's orientation. Firstly, we've got this spherical end here, this round spherical end. This is the head of the humerus. You can see by the shape of the head here, it must form part of a ball and socket joint. There is only two ball and socket joints, so this forms one of them. This is the shoulder. If we look at the inferior end, it's got this more spherical type sort of cylinder structure at the end. Now that cylinder structure actually forms part of the hinge joint of our elbow, where the ulna wraps around the spherical object there. Notice at the back here there's this hole or fossa. This is called the olecranon fossa. Now that's the fossa where when you straighten your arm, your elbow or olecranon process, which is the tip of the elbow, falls into. Now, if we know that that elbow fossa or olecranon fossa must be at the back or the posterior, and we look at the head, the spherical head, one side protrudes slightly towards the medial side, right? Because the head attaches obviously on your lateral side of your body, so the bulge has got to be on the medial side, then this must be your right humerus. So this is the ulna. There's a couple of features on the ulna which help us determine that it is the ulna. Firstly, we've got this U for ulna, right? So the shape of this end or head of the ulna forms a U, which helps us easily determine that it is the ulna. But which ulna is it? Well, if you also look at this head of the ulna here, it's got this groove here where the radius actually fits in. So if I pick up a radius and I place it in that groove, you can see that the spherical head of the radius sits tightly in that groove and forms a pivot joint for the radio-ulnar joint. Now if we look at this end here, or the distal end, we've got this little lump. That's called the styloid process of the ulna. Now if we know the ulna is on the medial side of the forearm in the anatomical position, and we know that the radius is on the lateral side, then this groove must also be pointing lateral. So it must be the right ulna. So this is the radius. There's a couple of distinguishing features on the radius which help us determine that it is the radius. Firstly, we've got the head of the radius, which is this fully spherical round end. And this is what forms the pivot joint at the radio-ulnar joint. At the distal end of the radius, we've got styloid process of the radius. And on the top, or the anterior portion of the radius, we've got the radial tuberosity. We know that the radius forms the lateral portion of your forearm. We also know that the bicep brachii, which attaches to the radial tuberosity, is on the anterior side of your arm. So if this lump here, or radial tuberosity, must point anteriorly, and the styloid process must point laterally, then this must be your right radius.